Ray, Matt, welcome to New Zealand. It's good to have you here. I think we made contact sort of around the time of the referendum to get a bit of advice from you.
Absolutely.
Look, Ray, firstly, let's start with you. Just tell us a bit about how you got into this.
So I've been in law enforcement for about 28 years. I worked in the Denver metro area, of course. Where we really got involved with everything when it comes to marijuana, drug issues, et cetera, was the Colorado Drug Investigators Association.
Yep.
Myself, I'm the executive director, and Matt is the president.
So just remind us, when did Colorado legalize cannabis, marijuana week?
2013 is when we actually kicked off with legalization.
So you've had a 12-year experiment, and we're going to find out about that. Before we do, Matt, tell us how you got into this.
Well, kind of similarly to Ray, I've been a police officer for 25 years. My last 18 years has all been in narcotics. That's really where I find my passion and trying to keep drugs away from our kids and our communities. And so that path also led me to the Drug Investigators Association. Ray and I are both heavily involved in that. And so that brings us to, trying to advance, what our mission is and to keep our communities safer. And so we have more outreach.
So in 2018, 2 years before our referendum, when we knew it was coming up, I did a fact-finding mission to Colorado, went down to Pueblo, went to Denver, and saw some of the grows, saw the gas and grass where you can get your gas for your vehicle and your grass for smoking. 12 years ago, how did they persuade the people of Colorado that they should go down this track when I think most of us realized it was going to end in disaster?
In Colorado at the time when everything sort of happened, it was very easy to get legislation or a vote, right, of the people on a petition. They've since changed that. So I think what happened is Colorado was very vulnerable because our state it was easy to get items on to the voters so the voters could actually vote on them, right? So it was very easy. So I think Colorado was just a ripe state for that. And of course, that's when it all started, right?
So what was the messaging that sort of sucked them in?
I think the messaging all along has been, everyone looks at marijuana and they look at it and go, this is for kids, it's for people with medical conditions, it's for the elderly, these people need this, right? So I think a lot of it is the marijuana lobby is very good at compassion, right? They want to get that compassion out there. So people look at it and they look at the news or they look at the television and everybody's talking about these elderly folks who need marijuana or these children who are having, epileptic seizures and things, and it helps them. And things of that nature, right? So I think what happens is you tug at the heartstrings of people and they say, okay, there is something that, can be done with this. And I think that's where it really started, especially with medical marijuana and the kind of the advancement and the commercialization of it after that.
And for New Zealand, medical marijuana has been more recent with the experience that Colorado has had. Is there any legitimacy to the argument that medicinal marijuana has a place?
No. So,
that's simple.
In a word, no. And there's still, at this point, even though our state of Colorado is so entrenched with the marijuana industry, which, by the way, that was part of the message in 2013 when they wanted to pass recreational, was, look, we've already got all this medical marijuana. Look at all of these people that are already using it. And so why won't we just open it up to more people so more people have access? And then they play on those emotions, right? They trot out elderly people and they trot out children, and they use anecdotal stories, almost exclusively anecdotal stories about how it helps people with medical conditions. To this date, unless you're aware of something, and if you are, please tell me about it. But to this date, I know of no empirical, peer-reviewed research that proves marijuana is a viable medical treatment for anyone. It's just about getting high.
And the problem with us in Colorado was, of course, initially when this all took off, we've had medical marijuana on the books in Colorado for years, right? It's about 23 years or so we've had medical marijuana on the books. And really there was only around maybe 12 to 1,500 folks that were on the marijuana registry at the time, right? And those were people that went in, they saw a doctor and they were recommended marijuana for whatever debilitating medical condition is, right? If they're dying of cancer or something and it may help their pain or whatever that looks like, right? That's what they would do. And then what happened in Colorado was, as people started kind of seeing, okay, the marijuana thing's working, it's working. We had a change in the government, of course, through Department of Justice, and we had a new president in. And pretty much they said, we're not going to do anything with states that have medical marijuana. We're not going to go after those states
federally.
That was
under Obama.
Yeah, was under Obama. And when that occurred, that really opened the floodgates because folks looked at it and said, well, we're not going to get in trouble federally, so let's just go ahead and do this. What were they going to do to us? And at that point, next thing you know, it shoots up to over 100,000 recommendations. And we have a lot of doctors who would go in, and these doctors were set up their little shops and everything else. And folks would come in and they'd walk in and go, you know, I have a bad ankle. Well, what happened? I broke it playing football 3 years ago or 10 years ago, and it still gives me problems. Well, you probably need marijuana.
Yeah.
And then they would recommend them marijuana. And then of course they were smart because they would say, well, you know, I do edibles. You know, I do edibles, or I do oils, or whatever that is. So I need more plants. So then we would have these doctors that would recommend 99 marijuana plants per patient. So now you look at 100,000 folks who are looking at 99 plant recommendations, and that is just an astronomical amount of marijuana that are growing out in people's backyards, inside their homes, etc. So it just became a huge mess. Then, of course, people start seeing it, and now they start seeing maybe there's some money involved in this stuff too, right? The state sees, oh, this is a great way we could tax this and we could start making a ton of money, right? Next thing you know, that's what happens, right? Yeah. This whole thing kind of progresses, we legalize, and then it kind of moves on from there.
Okay. And so the myth that's sold is that if you legalize, that doesn't increase usage. You know, more and more people aren't going to use it. Is that a myth?
It is. Excuse me. It is a myth, total myth, because that's all we've seen is use rise dramatically in our state, adult use rise just across the board. You've made it more available, plain and simple. And now, because you've given more people access, what's going to come with that? More use. And then in addition with that, combine it with the normalization message that, supporters and even government agencies, send by normalizing things with marijuana. People think it's just a normal thing. It's somewhat socially acceptable. They worked really hard to reduce the stigma of marijuana. People forget that stigma is actually very important to keeping people safe a lot of times. And so it can be a very great mechanism to keeping people healthier and actually safer. And we've tried to reduce that in Colorado, unfortunately. So there you have it.
Yeah, marijuana tourism. Folks come to Colorado just because they want to try marijuana. And a lot of folks, what happens, they land in Denver, and the first place they go to the dispensary. Yeah. And because they're like, oh, we can get marijuana, we can go try it out, or we can get this, or we can do that, right? So that increases and a lot of times folks come to Colorado and they want to try, marijuana, and they've never tried the high potency marijuana that we actually have. Ooh. And next thing you know, we're dealing with all kinds of other issues that comes with that.
So the argument they use is that they can regulate it, they can keep control of it, and it's better to have it in a regulated market than a black market. I guess there's two questions there. Firstly, have they been able to regulate it? And two, what's happened to the black market?
Have they been able to regulate it? Yes. Now, how effectively? That's really up for debate. I would say not very well.
Because when I was there in 2018, I think there was this big debate about labeling products to warn kids.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You hear a lot about tracking plants, seed to sale, because each plant is barcoded. We pass state laws that require labeling that's not inviting to children and things like that. That's not a bad thing.
Has that helped?
I can't tell you how much that's helped. What I think is you still have tons of access to this, because now, instead of having to find your marijuana in a more difficult manner, now it's everywhere. Right. Now your parents have it. So instead of
in your backyard?
Yeah, exactly. It might be grown in your backyard. Your parents have their own whatever stash in their house for their own personal use. Kids can get their hands on it. A lot of the products, no matter what kind of label they put on them, look like candy. And so what are children going to do? They're going to pick that up. They're going to put it in their mouth. And that's why poison control reports related to marijuana are through the roof, like over 500% up since we legalized.
Right.
And I think that what they've done is we have a framework, right? There is a framework in the state that it somewhat works. However, there's so many loopholes to that framework where if I'm a marijuana user and I want to go into a dispensary, I'll go into a dispensary, I'll buy my marijuana, and then I can walk right out and go to the dispensary next door and buy more marijuana. So, of course, what's that do? It drives that black market, right? So we have all these people from, these individuals who are in Colorado who are kind of like the middleman, right? So people from all over the country call them and say, hey, can you get me some of this? Can you give me this? Can you get me that? And then they ship it to them, or they do whatever they do there, right? So there's a lot of that. And then, of course, the black market has it's exploded.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a question. Why has it exploded if it's legal?
Because it's more expensive to buy it in the regulated manner, because that's taxed. It's taxed because that was another promise that the pro-marijuana lobby made, right? This will be good. It'll be good for schools. Our schools will be better. Yeah. We'll be able to, teachers will get
and
paid.
Hospitals. And
absolutely. Every compassionate project that you'd like to fund that's what they're going to
I
grab
think
onto.
we imported every one of your arguments. There was an imported culture war in New Zealand, as they always accuse us of.
I'm sure you did.
It does not matter what country or what state you're in. The talking points are exactly the same.
Yeah.
They're exactly the same for everybody.
And I would also say the legal market, there are a percentage of those folks that wanted to do it right. There are people who are still doing it right. And in terms of abiding by the regulations, abiding by the laws that were set out for that marijuana
Keeping it
industry.
to adult use.
Yes, exactly. And selling it appropriately, not selling it out the back door. Now, there were other people that were in the even licensed industry that didn't have the same intentions. They are bad actors, right? There are still some of those folks around too. But the legal industry aside, what that legal regulated industry really did was provide cover for everybody else who just wanted to participate in the black market.
Ooh.
And so it was extremely difficult for law enforcement to sift through and determine who was doing it legally, who was not doing it legally, because 100% black market in a lot of instances looks exactly the same as 100% legitimate would.
Yeah.
So we can't figure it out.
I think the biggest eye-opener for me when I came over is that I came over with the perception that it was about smoking a joint. It was your Woodstock weed or your parents' pot. And to see all the products, the vaping and the dabs, the concentrated products, I mean, that just blew me away about how big the market was going to get. And that hasn't stopped, has it?
Well, that also increases use. I mean, if you think about it, because all of those things, they don't carry the stigma of walking around in downtown Denver smoking a joint. So if you're dabbing or you're taking gummies or you're doing whatever that is, it seems it holds less of a stigma versus sitting there just smoking a joint, right? So people can eat candies, or they could take oils, or they could do whatever that looks like. So that also, of course, increases use. But then what we run into is people come in here to, come to Colorado. And when they get to Colorado, they start consuming some of these products that they've never seen before. I mean, some of our edible products, they're, 50, 60, 70% THC. I mean, we're as high as 99% pure THC in some forms. Our flower marijuana in Colorado is upwards of 25, 35%, which, when you look at, old mom and pop's old marijuana from back in the day was maybe 2, 3, 5%, maybe, so it also increases all of the other things that we've seen, especially on the medical side, health, and all those other things. What is nice though is, over the years, what we've been able to do is we've been able to look at how marijuana is affecting people. And now there's studies coming out showing it causes a bunch of different issues, so it actually has, I think, expanded a lot by being able to test it and see and see kind of these studies and what these studies are showing people are doing with it.
When I came back from Colorado, I was on the television New Zealand with a debate with the Green MP who was promoting this. And she was promoting that the results were great out of Colorado. They'd seen the harm drop. She was quoting from the Cato report, which is a libertarian organization. From what I can see from the data that's coming out of Colorado, it's all going in the wrong direction, isn't it? I mean, is there any good consequence, any good result that you can think of?
No.
Less people in prison?
No, there's still people in prison. And this is the thing, and this is another thing that the marijuana lobby does.
We're putting people in prison.
Yeah, we're not putting people in prison for marijuana.
No,
now if you're selling tremendous amounts of it, sure, you're probably going to go to prison. Yep. However, we're not taking people to jail for using marijuana. We're not taking people to jail for possessing a little bit of marijuana. That never happened. What happened is a lot of the statistics and the statistical gathering when they did that was, for instance, I write you a ticket because you had marijuana, right? Yep. Well, then they log that as an arrest. So it looks like we're arresting thousands and thousands and thousands of people when it was something simply like a ticket that was about $50 to pay it. So it wasn't it's not this huge thing where we're just imprisoning all these people, right? If you're in prison for marijuana, you did a lot of stuff.
Well, that's the same as in New Zealand. They would say that people went to prison for marijuana, but it was actually the crimes they were committing to get their drugs or to get the money to buy their drugs.
Or they're selling a substantial amount of marijuana.
Dealers.
That's a little bit different, right? When you're distributing pounds and pound weight, your kilos and kilos of marijuana, it's a lot different than you just have a joint or you're doing whatever, right? So that was one of the things that they pushed real hard is when we can get all these people these people aren't in prison for that.
But I think the concern was that big marijuana was deliberately targeting young people. And like we've got a vaping problem in New Zealand, but fortunately they're not vaping cannabis yet because theoretically it's not legal. But in Colorado, it was a major problem because kids could vape marijuana in class, no smell, no smoke. Nobody actually knew. I mean,
right.
That's got to be a major issue for for families dealing with young kids wanting to get into this.
Well, and you deal with so much unregulated stuff too in the marketplace, right? You know, we had a big issue in the U.S. where we had a bunch of vaping things. People were dying from vaping because some of the additives that they were putting in it and things like that. And there was probably a 3 to a couple month period for sure where there was multiple people that were dying off of this stuff because they don't know what's in it, right? You don't know what's in this stuff.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, you know, typically with our food, you know, like your edibles or your anything we eat, you know, anything we eat and consume as consumers, there's regulations on that stuff, right? The FDA, everybody kind of looks at all this stuff and how is it made and all of these different things. With marijuana, they just said, you guys go ahead and go do it. So there are no checks and balances as to how things, you know, are made.
Yeah.
So, you know, we always get these alerts, not always, but we get these alerts going, if you purchase marijuana from this dispensary at this time, just so you know, there was a bunch of mold in it, guaranteed that marijuana has already been sold. It is already out the door and these individuals are consuming it, or, you know, it has high levels of, you know, some type of chemical in it or whatever that looks like. And it's always after the fact that we report that to people.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, like everything we do in the US when it comes to food and drugs and all this other stuff, it's extremely, extremely regulated for the most part. But when it comes to marijuana, we just throw that all aside and you can do whatever you want. So it's just a very, very interesting thing.
Right.
And I think the lobby is so strong and they have so much money and so much backing behind them that they can get away with it.
Just before COVID shut down the world in 2020, we actually hosted Alex Berenson, and he's written about the link between high-potency cannabis and psychosis, schizophrenia, and violence.
Yes.
He was rubbished by a lot of pro-drug advocates when we brought him over, despite very good reasoning. Now, we're 5 years on from that. Is Alex Berenson onto something? He's an ex-New York Times writer, now blogs on Substack very successfully. Is he onto something that the high-potency cannabis is causing huge issues in terms of schizophrenia and violence?
Yes, absolutely. And when we're talking about studies, you can find studies that prove that marijuana as a psychoactive drug is linked to mental illness later in life. It's linked to lack of cognitive ability, especially among adolescents, which can follow them for up to 30 days or so after their last use. Think about that with our children who are trying to go to school. We do everything we can to get our kids to school and get them to as good of schools as we can get them to, and for them to learn, and we encourage them to do homework and everything else. There's nothing like undoing all of that effort on the part of all of our communities for kids, like letting them smoke marijuana or giving them access to marijuana however they ingest it. It's not going to be good for them, and it's linked to psychotic breaks in adults, which can occur later in life. And it's pretty obvious that chronic use is linked to that as well. You can find studies that prove that.
Yeah.
So back to your earlier question, can you think of any good consequence that's come out of marijuana legalization? I would give you one. And that good consequence would be we finally have the knowledge, we know more about marijuana, and we know enough now that we can positively say, based on proof and evidence, this is bad for you, and it's bad for your community, and it's bad for our society.
Well, that's actually one statement that I've made to those of us who are trying to hold the line, is that the longer we wait in New Zealand, because I think in 2020 we dodged a bullet by just getting over the line with a no vote, despite the media working hard to get a yes vote, that the longer this debate goes on, it's actually in our favour, because Colorado is a bit like the canary in the mine. We're actually seeing the outcome of the social experiment in Colorado, and that's actually your message to this conference in New Zealand, isn't it?
Yes.
That we need to sit up and take notice of what's happening in Colorado.
And I think what you can also take notice of is you look across the United States right now. There are many states where they're trying to legalize, and they are no longer legalizing marijuana because I think what they're starting to see, okay, there are all of these types of issues with it. There's issues with the black market. Yeah, the tax money sounds great, right? And if you're a tax-strapped state and you need the money or whatever, sure, it sounds great. But when you look at all the unintended consequences of what you're dealing with, when you're looking at residential growing, you're looking at youth and adult use, you're looking at fatal accidents, you're looking at all of these different things that start to expand, and it gets worse. So I think a lot of states are seeing that, and now they're kind of pulling back the reins a little bit, like, okay, hang on a second, let's wait on this. And over the last couple of years, we've actually seen that, where a lot of states have not legalized because they look at all those. A lot of them have medical marijuana, right? And I think that's part of that compassion piece.
Yeah.
But medical marijuana leads you to recreational marijuana eventually, right? They get their foot in the door, and other people will look at it and go, well, this is helping people. I don't understand why we can't use it. It's all the other things that it brings with it that cause the problems.
Yeah.
Our message for this conference, and don't worry, it is a serious subject, right? And it's something that we're really passionate about. However, we take a tongue-in-cheek approach to it. We have fun with it. And what we're going to do today is take the group on a wild ride through the dumpster fire that our state has become in Colorado and have some laughs about it, but also address the serious issues and the impact of it.
So you know the playbook in terms of, you know, what they're doing. I've observed it, but just for our audience. So if New Zealand had legalized cannabis in 2020, what would have been next for New Zealand?
What would first happen would be, and this is our overall message when we talk to groups, right, is if you legalize it here, whether it's another American state, whether it's another country, another community, if you legalize it here, it's going to change the complexion of your community. So that, first and foremost, get ready for that.
In what way?
You have a beautiful city here. You have a beautiful country. We've got to spend some time here and see that. And it's something you should be proud of. And at the same time, if you legalize marijuana, it's going to change the complexion in a way that is dirtier. It's
smellier.
It's going to be much smellier. It's going to be a lot dirtier. You're going to have more mental illness. You're going to have more people who are walking around like zombies. There's just no other way to say it, because they're going to have mental illness because of marijuana. But that's also going to lead to the legalization of other drugs. It's going to lead to more dependency on substance abuse and everything else. And so it just totally changes how your state or your country looks.
So in Colorado, have they legalized other drugs?
Yes. So what's happened in Colorado, and I think this is kind of nationwide, you know, the U.S. has really kind of pulled back on some of the drug enforcement things that we do, right? Or limited our ability to enforce drugs and like lessen penalties and things like that, because they look at it, you know, a lot of the talking points is this is like it's a mental problem, or it's this is a victimless crime and all these other things, where it really is not, right? There are tons of victims if you look at all these things, especially even with marijuana. You know, if someone's driving down the road and they're high on marijuana and they kill a family, well, guess what? This is not a victimless crime, you know, and everyone goes, oh, it's a victimless crime. It's not a big deal. It's just marijuana. It's just marijuana. But it's not just marijuana. It's all the other things that come with it. So what have we seen across the country, right? We've kind of pulled back a little bit and go, you know what, we're going to make all hard drugs misdemeanors. So what's happened now? We have an insatiable appetite for drugs in the United States, and it's just getting worse, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. So when you kind of look at those things, it's a lot more less penalty, right? When it comes to a lot of the felony level drugs, they knock it down to a misdemeanor. You get a ticket. We take your drugs. You get a ticket, and we send you on your way. But also people, I think what's happened, especially in Colorado, they've kind of normalized this thing, right? So, and it's how they market things. For us now, we have legal psilocybin magic mushrooms. You know, those are legal in Colorado now, right? So it's one of those things where I think people kind of pull back a little bit and go, yeah, does this really affect me? They list it as natural medicine in the bill. So people read and go, oh, if I could take something naturally and it's a medicine, then let's take it. You know, there are some studies that say that some of the psilocin and things like that do have some impact on people with PTSD and things like that. There is some studies. But when you're just consuming mushrooms just to consume mushrooms and do whatever it is you're going to do, it just shows you how much damage that can cause to your state.
And we've actually had those calls for magic mushroom. In fact, just up the road at Auckland University, they're doing a study right now on the effect of magic mushrooms on certain mental illnesses.
Sure.
So is that part of the playbook to normalize drug use?
Of course. And what they're going to do in this case, and they've done it with other drugs too, where they tried to legalize some other hallucinogenic substances in Colorado, like MDMA, ecstasy, right? Is they say, look, this helps people with PTSD. PTSD is one of those things that is impacting. It does impact people. I'm glad that we're way more aware of that nowadays than we ever were before. I think that's important. But understand too that the pro-drug movement, the pro-drug lobby is trying to latch on to those compassionate issues. Yeah. And what they'll do, and what they'll say, and what they've done in the United States and in Colorado is they've said, look, this helps our military veterans. Don't be fooled by this, right? And this is not for your military veterans. I'm sure, could it help some of them? If it actually helps somebody, of course it could. But that's not really the focus. That is the prop that they're using to try and get stuff legalized so they can do whatever they want with it afterwards. Yeah. And just make sure we have widespread use is what they want.
What would you say to groups in New Zealand who are basically saying, well, we shouldn't be locking up people for drug use. It shouldn't be a legal issue. It should be a health approach. They just need addiction counseling. We should adopt that approach.
We've had the harm reduction approach in Colorado for a long time. That's how they look at it, right? It's harm reduction. Let's get rid of this. Let's do this. Let's do that. The number one thing with people who are addicted to drugs, and if you want to get them into rehab, is they have to want to go to rehab, right? You can't force them. And even if you do force them, what's going to say that it's going to work? So you have all these folks. I mean, the best thing ever would be get off of it completely, right? But your country, as well as ours, right, has, the individuals like to consume drugs, and that's just what they do, right? We've had the harm reduction method, and we've shown that due to harm reduction methods, it has not changed anything. We actually have more mental illness. We have more issues. We have a lot more drug problems and everything else. And I'm not saying it's necessarily all a harm reduction piece, right? And I think there's probably a little bit of both, right? Are there individuals who, have some opiate disorders, some opiate use disorders and things of that nature? Sure, there probably is. And those folks could probably use rehab, and what we talked about a lot in like some of our latest legislative sessions and things of that nature is there is a place for that. Right? Like I could say, you're going to be charged with a felony. If you go to rehab, we'll get rid of that felony or whatever that looks like, right? If you successfully complete this is what you get. But then they all look at it as, this is a health issue. This is a health issue. Why are we jailing people at all? Right? Or why are we charging them with this? Or why are we charging them with that? But there's no incentive to get yourself clean.
Coercion.
But there's no coercion. There's no incentive. Then why would you do it? Right? That it's just prevalent everywhere.
Yeah.
We understand it. We've heard it so much, especially in Colorado, this notion of we should be handing out hugs instead of tickets. It's consequences are mean, basically. Well, okay, how do you go through life where consequences aren't helping drive your behavior? All of us need to know there's some sort of consequence for making a terrible choice, right? And so without that, when we get rid of the consequence and we put that aside, then it's just go ahead and enjoy and just do whatever you want to do. And it leads to this problem that we have, the dumpster fire that we're talking about.
So just finally, I'd just like to get your advice, firstly, to New Zealand politicians, legislators. What would you say to them?
I would say to them, they need to pay very, very close attention to what they're doing. And the reason I say that is it all sounds great. It sounds great because you're going to have tax dollars. It sounds great because, we want these, if folks want to try it, they can use it as medicine or whatever that is. But you really, really need to focus on, this is a beautiful country. Your country will change. The face of your country will change. You look at the United States over the last 20 years, we've always had drug use in the United States, right? Now it's nothing but rampant drug use. And you see the complexion and how it affects our country. And that's even things including like fentanyl, right? We have fentanyl problems where, fentanyl was it was always just used as a pain medication, and people would use patches or they would use whatever. And then next thing you know, our overdose rates, we were losing over 100,000 people a year in our country due to overdose, primarily from opiates. About 75-80% of that was going to be from fentanyl. And then we lose a lot of folks to methamphetamine and things of that nature, right? But if you continue to make it accepted, and people are like, you know what, I want to use my drugs, and your legislature says, and your legislative folks say, you know what, you can go ahead and use drugs, and it's not going to be that big a deal. It will drastically change the complexion and the look of your country. Bottom line.
Yeah. I would echo exactly what Ray said. And I would say my message to, your elected folks would be stand up for the people here. Don't fall into that trap of believing the myths and the lies that you get from America supposedly being this great test lab for marijuana legalization. Stand up for your country. Stand up for the residents here. Do what's right. And that's what they need to do.
The other thing that the legislators, the politicians have often trumpeted is drug testing. In other words, if we test the drugs and make sure that they're the pure drug, at least you're not taking all the artificial and the, that's a response we have as well. But have you heard that argument? That's the argument used in New Zealand. We just need to drug test to make sure it's pure.
Yeah, well, that's part of it, and like they've tried in the U.S. to do things like safe injection sites where they'll let you consume your drugs with somebody. All that does is just it okays drug use. Hey, you know what? We're going to test it and make sure it's okay for you to use beforehand. That's crazy, and it doesn't matter because these people you're not going to have all the drugs, and they're not going to be able to get all the drugs from you. They're going to go somewhere else to get those drugs, and that's going to be the black market.
But, but the argument is they're going to use them anyway, so let's try and, well, keep them safer. I mean, even as I say that, I know it's a dumb statement.
It's a crazy notion. I mean, you know, so let's say this. You have, what, about 5 million people in New Zealand, right? And let's say 1 million of them use drugs right now, right? And then they talk to their friends and go, hey, but it's okay. It's okay. And they test it for us. Now you got 2-3 million people who are using these drugs. And then now you have all kinds of a slew of other issues, right? Because it's not the use of the drugs, right? I mean, the use of the drugs it's important, and it does change people's lives dramatically in some cases, right? It's all that other stuff where someone who's high is driving down the road and kills a family, or you know, whatever that looks like. Your crime is going to go through the roof as well, because the black market's still going to be feeding drugs here. It doesn't matter if the country tests them or not. They're still going to be feeding drugs here no matter what.
Well, to their point, no one was being harmed by smoking little amounts of marijuana that they did before anyway. So if there's no harm in that, then why do we need to make sure it's regulated and it's quote unquote pure, or there's whatever is going on? I mean, I think it's just ridiculous. It's another, we want you to feel good about this, and we want you to think that we're actually professionals here, and this is going to be some sort of regulated industry. They won't be able to put in the safeguards that they want to. It's just impossible to even do. They won't be able to have eyes on all of the producers or manufacturers of marijuana products. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And why would you even need to if no one was being harmed before anyway?
So just finally, there'll be families watching this, parents, maybe some youth groups watching this. What's your message to families about what you've seen happen in Colorado and just about the whole drug-free messaging?
My message would be, talk to your children. I think what a lot of times what happens is our children they're so influenced by everything, social media, they're influenced by their friends at school and these other things. And the big thing would be, just talk to your children. You know, the last thing you want to do is get that phone call at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning that your child consumed something they shouldn't have, and now they died. You know, so talk to your children. You know, I talk to I have a 9-year-old, you know, and she knows about drugs because I want to ensure that she's safe, right? I think anyone who has children, you should have these conversations, and don't rely on someone else to do it. Do it yourself. Tell them, stay away from it. Even if someone offers you something, you never take it. You never take it, right? If later on in life you get older and you want to do something, that's up to you. When you're an adult, you can decide what you want to do. But the big thing is we have to protect our youth now. And that starts with having a conversation and saying, stay away from this stuff. We've had a lot of youth who have died in the United States because of all of this drug use. And it's sad. It really is a sad deal.
Is there an increase in Colorado of that messaging, drug-free messaging, because of the legalization?
It's more about being safe while you use it type of messaging. A lot of,
It's more the normalization piece. They're normalizing it, right?
Even though they're seeing the consequences right in front of them.
Yes. Yeah. It's just the normalization piece. And I think a lot of it is people have just gotten used to it.
Yeah.
We've been doing it for so long now, people have just gotten used to it. Now, I do think that one piece of that drug messaging that has changed is, especially when it comes to fentanyl and things, some of the things we're seeing now, but it took several 100,000 Americans dying and several thousand in Colorado dying to learn, okay, this is not a good thing, right? And then, of course, they've started putting out that messaging where, granted, fentanyl is a little bit different than marijuana, right? When it comes to like the potency and the risk of death and things like that, it's tremendous compared to marijuana, of course, right? But that messaging we now get out.
Yeah.
And we never did that before. But also a piece of that is the studies, and some of the new studies that are coming out, I think are very, very important. I think people need to pay close attention to these things. You know, the heart attack rates, dementia. There's a ton of different things that have happened with folks who consume marijuana, because it's not the marijuana of back in the day.
Right.
This marijuana it's altered. Everything's done differently with it. It's just a completely different beast.
Yeah. And Matt, what's your advice for families?
Yeah. So I would say, and I have 4 kids myself, right? So, and they're all at that age where they're paying attention to what's going on around them. And it's sad because in our state, like, so much of it seems normal. And it seems like it's normal to use drugs almost now in Colorado. It seems like it's normal to use marijuana for sure. And one thing I just enforced with them, and of course they don't listen to dad, but maybe I can talk to somebody else's kids and they might listen to me, and just tell them, look, the cool kids are not doing that. And the cool adults are not doing that either. And you don't have to do that either to have a good time or to have fun with your friends or anything else. You don't need that stuff. So leave that for somebody else to make that decision. You make the right decisions. And one thing that does hopefully make an impression on my kids, because unfortunately in Colorado, we see so many people that are affected by mental illness that's been brought on, I believe in most cases, by substance abuse, and especially when it comes to marijuana. We see those living examples as they're trudging down the sidewalk with their, cardboard sign and their blanket and their shopping cart or what have you. Those are teachable moments, right? And I just say, kids, because they ask, Dad, why is that person, having such a hard time? Why is that person in such a bad shape? There could be a variety of reasons, but a lot of times it's going to be drugs. And so I reinforce to them, look, don't do drugs, guys. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, there. Well, Ray and Matt, we really appreciate the voice that you've had. Boy, we need your expertise and wisdom to warn New Zealanders, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you for having us.
And hopefully
Absolutely.
New Zealand doesn't go down the track of Colorado. We'll do everything we can to stop that. So, but welcome to New Zealand. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, all good.
Thank you.
And it's still beautiful because you haven't legalized. So
Keep it
thanks for
beautiful.
having us here.
Keep it beautiful.